One name gone cold, one path went thin. Keep your eyes open, we're going in.
On a spring evening in Alabama, a man was looking for dogwood trees. What he found instead were human bones. At first he didn't realize what he was looking at. The remains were so badly deteriorated that they appeared to be animal bones. But when he returned the following day and found clothing and personal belongings nearby, he realized something was very wrong. Someone had died there, and whoever that person was had been lying there for a very long time. There was clothing, a travel bag, a wallet, a possible Ohio's driver's license, 27 bullets in his pocket, and nearby, a small handgun. There were even spent shell casings at the scene. Yet after investigators worked to identify him, after they had checked missing person cases, after they examined his dental work and the strange remnants of identification found with him, they still couldn't answer the most basic question: who was he? More than 2 decades later, that question remains. Today we're going to look at the story of John Doe 3865 UMAL, a man who died somewhere in Alabama, but whose name seems to have disappeared with him. This is the story of John Doe 3865 UMAL. There's something I always want to keep in mind when covering an unidentified person. Before there was a case number, before there was a morgue photograph or a database entry, there was a person. And that's true here. We don't know this man's name. We don't know where he was born. We don't know what his voice sounded like. We don't know what kind of work he did, where he lived, or who he loved. But we can say something with certainty. He was somebody. According to the available case information, he was a white male, apparently an older adult. His height was estimated at approximately 5 feet 7 to 5 feet 8 inches, and he had gray or partially gray hair. There was also something very distinctive about his dental history. Investigators documented extensive dental work, including crowns, bridges, and root canals. And that's important because teeth can survive when almost everything else is gone. Dental records have helped identify countless people whose names would otherwise have remained unknown. So, investigators had something to work with. But first, they had to figure out who he was. On March 28, 1999, human remains were discovered in Dallas County, Alabama. The location was near U.S. Highway 80 East in the Selma area, near the Alabama River. According to the case information, a local man was in the area around dusk looking for dogwood trees, and that's when he came across what appeared to be bones. At first he thought they were animal bones, and honestly, that's understandable. The remains had been exposed to the elements for so long that they were skeletal. But the next day, after returning to the area and finding clothing and personal belongings nearby, he realized that these weren't animal remains at all. They belonged to a human being. And just like that, investigators had a death, but no identity. The condition of the remains suggested that this man had not died days or even weeks earlier. He may have been dead for approximately 1 to 2 years. That means the person investigators were looking for may have disappeared sometime around 1997 or 1998. And that immediately creates a very unsettling possibility. Someone could have been missing for a year or two, while his remains were lying only a short distance from a major highway, and yet no one had connected him to a missing person report. Investigators recovered clothing from the scene. There was a dark t-shirt, possibly dark green. Over that was a red and blue plaid, long-sleeved shirt made by Timberline. The shirt was a size extra large. He was also wearing a black synthetic jacket with epaulette-style shoulder straps. There were black trousers, fruit-of-the-loom underwear, white woven socks, and brown lace-up Rockport Vibram dress-style shoes. Now I need to note here, if you go to the John Doe Network and look this gentleman up, they have the shoes listed as Rockport Vibram shoes with an F, but they're actually Rockport Vibram shoes with a V. Some of these details may sound ordinary, but when a person's identity is unknown, ordinary things can become important. A brand, a size, a particular style of clothing, a pair of shoes, something that someone might remember. And there was another item that would become even more interesting: a travel bag. Near the remains was a brown leather-like travel bag, but there were no obvious external markings identifying its owner. Its presence led investigators to consider a possibility that this man may have been traveling. Perhaps he was transient. Perhaps he was hitchhiking. Perhaps he was simply passing through the area. But those are possibilities, not established facts. We don't know exactly why he was in Dallas County. We don't know where he'd come from, and we don't know where he intended to go. But the travel bag suggests that he may not have been settled in this area, and that may help explain one of the strangest things investigators discovered. Investigators checked for missing people in the local area, and apparently there wasn't a missing person report that matched him. That was an important clue, because if he wasn't a local resident, then investigators had to start thinking much bigger. They needed to look beyond Dallas County, beyond Alabama, possibly beyond the South altogether. And that's where the contents of his wallet became extremely interesting. An apparently empty wallet was found near the remains. Inside, or associated with the wallet, were several deteriorated pieces of what appeared to have been wallet inserts. One piece of plastic contained something investigators believed might be an image transfer from a driver's license. And despite the damage, there was something remarkable about it: a photograph, or at least the remnants of one. Investigators were able to digitally capture and enhance the image, and what emerged were images of a white male. There was also printing that appeared consistent with an Ohio's driver's license from the 1990s, but there was a major problem. The identifying information was too deteriorated to reveal a name. Think about that for a moment. The investigators may have had a photograph of the man. They may have had part of his identification. They may even have had a clue pointing towards where this man had lived, and still they couldn't put a name to him. The possible Ohio connection became one of the most intriguing aspects of the case. The deteriorated plastic appeared to contain lettering associated with an Ohio driver's license. But there's an important distinction here. Investigators could not establish with absolute certainty that the license belonged to the man whose remains were found. It may have been his, it may have belonged to someone else, and that matters, because it's very, very easy years later to look at one clue and turn it into a certainty. We shouldn't do that. What we can say is that investigators had what appeared to be remnants of an Ohio driver's license, including an image that may have been of the deceased, and that gave them a direction to investigate. Then there was his dental work. This man had extensive previous dental treatment: crowns, bridges, root canals. The kind of dental history can be extremely useful in an identification. But there was something else investigators noticed. Although he had received significant dental treatment in the past, some of his teeth had deteriorated badly. He had major cavities. There has been speculation that someone with this kind of extensive dental work may have been a veteran who received treatment through military service. Others have wondered whether the dental work suggested that he had once been financially comfortable. But those are theories. There is no confirmed evidence publicly established that he was a veteran, and there's no evidence proving that he had once been wealthy. So for now, his dental history is best viewed for what it is: a potentially valuable identifying clue. And then, yes, there's more. Investigators found something that makes this case even more difficult to explain. In the man's pockets were, are you ready, 27 unfired .25 caliber cartridges. 27, all unfired. And nearby was a small .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol. The weapon was identified as an R&B Industries model Fraser. It had a serial number, and its magazine contained 3 unfired Remington cartridges. There were also 2 fired cartridge casings near the remains, and that changes the story considerably, because now investigators weren't simply looking at an unidentified man who had died in a remote location. They were looking at a death scene involving a firearm. Investigators traced the serial number of the handgun. According to case information, the weapon had previously been reported stolen from California. So there's another major geographic clue: California, Ohio, Alabama. Suddenly the story of this unidentified man stretches across thousands of miles. But we don't know whether he has personally traveled through all these states. We don't know whether he owned the gun. We don't know how he acquired it. And we don't know whether the weapon was connected to his death. Those are questions, not answers. This is where it's tempting to start constructing a story. Maybe there was an argument. Maybe he met someone there. Maybe someone was following him. Maybe the shooting happened somewhere else. Maybe the gun belonged to someone else. Maybe he was traveling alone. Maybe he wasn't. There are countless possibilities, but we don't know which one is true. The evidence tells us that a gun was found near the remains. It tells us that 2 fired cartridge casings were found nearby. It tells us that 27 unfired cartridges were in his pocket, and some sources have characterized his death as a gunshot homicide. However, current publicly available case information does not provide enough detail for us to confidently reconstruct exactly what happened. So I'm not going to tell you a story that the evidence doesn't support. What I can say is that the circumstances surrounding his death remain deeply unclear. And then we come back to that photograph, perhaps the most frustrating clue in the entire case. Investigators apparently recovered enough of an image to transfer to obtain images of a white male. But the driver's license information itself was too damaged to provide his identity. Imagine having a photograph and still not knowing who you're looking at. Imagine knowing that somewhere there may be a family who would recognize that face instantly. A mother, a brother, a daughter, a friend. Someone who might look at that image and say, "That's him. That's my missing person." But after all these years, that connection hasn't been made publicly. Investigators didn't simply stop after checking local missing person reports. The case was compared against missing persons in a much broader search. More than 300 missing person cases have reportedly been considered during the investigation, yet none produced the definitive identification investigators needed. And that tells us something important. There may have been a missing person report somewhere that investigators couldn't connect to this man, or perhaps he was never officially reported missing. That happens. People disappear from unstable circumstances. People move. People lose contact with family. People live transient lives. And sometimes when they die far from home, there may be no immediate connection between the person who is missing and the unidentified remains found somewhere else. So let's put everything we know into a timeline. Somewhere inside that timeline is the answer. A moment when this man's life changed. A moment when he disappeared. A moment when he died. And perhaps a moment when someone else knew exactly what happened. Who was he? Where was he from? Was the possible Ohio driver's license actually his? Who was the man shown in the recovered photograph? Why was he in Alabama? How did a handgun reportedly stolen in California end up near him? Who fired the weapon? Why were 27 unfired cartridges in his pocket? Was he traveling alone? Was he a hitchhiker? Was he transient? And most importantly, who knew he was missing? We don't have answers to those questions, and I think it's important to say that plainly. There are theories surrounding this case. Some people have wondered whether the man was a transient or hitchhiker. Some have speculated that he may have been from Ohio. Some have suggested that his extensive dental work could point toward military service. And there are obvious questions surrounding the gun and the ammunition. But none of those theories should be presented as established fact. Because when a case has remained unsolved for decades, it's very easy for speculation to become repeated so many times that eventually people forget it was ever speculation. Here on Voices Left Behind, I want to keep those lines clear. And in this case, there are still a lot of questions. I've tried to imagine what it must be like for the person who discovered him, walking through the area at dusk looking for dogwood trees, seeing what appeared to be animal bones, then coming back the next day and realizing those bones belonged to a human being. By then, this man's life had already been reduced to scattered remains. His name was gone, his story was gone, and whatever happened to him was hidden somewhere in the years between his death and his discovery. But pieces of his life were still there. His clothes, his shoes, his dental work, his wallet, a possible photograph, a possible connection to Ohio, a gun, a bag, a handful of objects taken together that might have been enough to tell us who he was. Except they weren't. Not yet. And that's why I'm putting this case in front of you. Because sometimes an identification doesn't come from a laboratory. It comes from a person watching a video. Someone who sees a face. Someone who remembers a missing neighbor. Someone who remembers a relative who disappeared in the late 1990s. Someone who recognizes a particular jacket, a pair of shoes, a dental history. Or even a story about a man who is traveling through Alabama. Maybe the clue is sitting in someone's memory. And that person may have no idea that it matters. John Doe, 3865UMAL, has been unidentified for more than 27 years. 27 years since someone found his remains beside Highway 80. 27 years since investigators began trying to answer the question, who was this man? And after all this time, we still don't know. But I don't think that means his story is over, because being unidentified doesn't mean being unimportant. It doesn't mean he didn't have people who loved him. It doesn't mean nobody ever wondered where he went, and it certainly doesn't mean he should simply disappear into a database and be forgotten. If you recognize this man, if you recognize the photograph associated with this case, if you know someone who disappeared around 1997 or 1998 and could fit the description, or if you have information that might help investigators identify him, please report it to the appropriate authorities. That information will be in the description box below this video. Don't assume somebody else has already done it. Obviously, they haven't, because this man remains unidentified. Because one phone call, one memory, one old photograph, or one family story could finally give this man something he's been without for more than 2 decades. His name. And if you're new here, this is Voices Left Behind. This channel is about the people whose stories can easily get lost. Missing people, unidentified people, families still waiting for answers, cases that may not make national headlines, but still deserve to be remembered. If you believe these people deserve a voice, please subscribe to Voices Left Behind. And if you can, share this video. Because sometimes solving a case doesn't begin with detectives finding a clue. Sometimes it begins with someone watching.
If you know a thing, say it now.